So, welcome on this wintry mid-February evening to a live conversation with best-selling authors Dave Richo and Sharon Salzberg that we're calling The Art of Mindful Loving. I'm Ivan Burkoltz, one of the owners of Shambhala Publications, and I'll be hosting the call today. I've had the pleasure of working with both Dave and Sharon on various projects over the years, and I'm very excited for this conversation. Is a psychotherapist, teacher, writer, and workshop leader whose work emphasizes the benefits of mindfulness and loving kindness in personal growth and emotional well-being. He's the author of many books, including the best-selling How to Be an Adult in Relationships. Today, we are launching the promotions for an online course on that subject, and we are delighted to be joined by the illustrious Sharon Salzberg to talk a bit about mindful loving, which is the crux of Dave's book and the course. Sharon, of course, is an absolute expert in this field. Sharon is a meditation pioneer, world-renowned teacher, and New York Times bestselling author. She's one of the first to bring mindfulness and loving kindness meditation to mainstream American culture over 45 years ago. In addition to her best-selling books, Loving Kindness, of which we are the proud publisher, and Real Happiness, amongst many others, her new book, Real Life, comes out in April. Now that that's out of the way, we can launch in. This call will be about an hour, the first 30 to 40 minutes of which will be a conversation between Dave and Sharon. We'll then take some questions. If you'd like to ask a question, please do so in the chat section below the video. To see that, you just need to enter a name and press join. I'll read some of these to Dave and Sharon, and we'll do our best to get through as many as we can in our time together. So without further ado, I'll hand things over to Dave and Sharon.
Thank you, Ivan.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
And we thought we'd begin with 1 minute of silence, 1 minute meditation. So why don't we begin now, and I'll let you know when the minute is up. Welcome, everyone. Sharon, I'd like to begin by saying thank you again for taking the time to be here for our conversation.
Well, I'm really happy.
I admire your work.
Thank you very much. And I love talking about the topic, and I appreciate the chance to have the conversation with you.
Okay.
So, was your book reissued recently? The book?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is the new version, which just came out last year. And it has everything the original one has, but then it also has some new sections.
Well, that's exciting. Last year was a funny year to have a book come out.
Yeah.
I'm actually curious about what you'd have to say. I'm curious about so many things about this sort of recent iteration in the world, and how we emerge from it, and the consequences to one's sense of safety and belonging and love. But even before we get there, I'm wondering when this became such a profound topic for you, and how, like what happened. For me, it was actually the very beginning of my meditation practice, which was January of 1971, when S.N. Goenka, who was my first teacher, it was really like a mindfulness retreat, especially mindfulness of the body. But at the very end, he did a little loving kindness meditation, almost as a kind of ceremonial way of saying goodbye. And that was it. I just thought, what is that? What's that one? But it was a long time before I could actually get instruction, and very quickly began teaching it. Um, so there's actually a moment in time I can point to where I realized that I had some need of this, that this would benefit me, even though I didn't know how to access it. So I'm just curious about your history with this kind of approach, whether it's the formal meditation practice or just the quality.
Well, first of all, it's synchronicity because you said 1971, and that's the exact same year I began my quest. And I was in Boston at the time, and Trungpa Rinpoche was there. And I read Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, which was the very first Buddhist book I ever read. And coming from a Catholic background, I did not have an introduction to Buddhism. So that book helped me. And since I was a psychotherapist, of course, I realized this is a way of expanding what therapy is really about. So that instead of it being only about issues that come up, which we address, process, and hopefully resolve in the course of therapy, here is something more. It's an invitation to go deeper into what you're about and what a relationship might be about. And the bridge into that was mindfulness. Just the very fact that you could actually sit even for a minute without indulging in judgments, fear, and clinging was big news to me. And so that's how it all began. And I certainly noticed in my own relationships that I needed a lot of tutoring as to, how it can possibly work. I could see that my big ego was in the way, and Trungpa actually proposed that you could even let go of some of that ego bigness, and you could start to reduce the way your ego is present in a relationship. So that led me to this idea of, can I dispossess myself of ego to gratify the relationship rather than use the relationship to gratify my ego? And Buddhism is a pathway into that possibility. The very first sentence of my book is, love is the possibility of possibilities. Like the very best thing we can get to as humans. So that's how it all began. But thank you for asking that question. I never quite put it together.
Possibility of possibilities. Okay, I have a friend who looks at the back of every book to see what the very last word is. So I'm curious, what's the last word of your book?
The last word of the book?
Yeah, just open it up and tell us what the last word is.
Oh, okay. Well, that's an interesting question.
Yeah.
Let's see. The last word is Teresa.
Okay.
Because I quoted a poem by Richard Crashaw called The Hymn to Saint Teresa.
Oh, nice.
It says, all your old woes will now smile on you. And that happens when you make that move toward a more mindful way of living.
I just wanted to hop in for a second and encourage people in the chat to ask questions as we go along, because when we get to the time to ask questions, it'd be great to have a few loaded up and ready. So if you have questions about the topic in general for Sharon and Dave, or as you develop questions as they're talking, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll take them later. Please continue, Sharon and Dave.
Thank you. Well, there's something I think so interesting and probably a lifetime's exploration in the relationship between awareness and love, or attention and love. And one of the ways I talk about loving kindness a lot these days has to do with simply connection. You know, when do we actually feel a connection to someone else? And it's really like an emergent property of paying attention. You know, for all the times we encounter somebody and we look right through them instead of at them, or I would say especially in kind of closer relationships, we're more relating to a set of assumptions about the person than actually relating to the person. So I wonder, Dave, if you could say something about, in those closer relationships, whether it's romantic or not, just the importance of paying attention, if you see it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I do. And of course, there are hazards in both directions because it may be hard for me to pay attention to the real you, and also you may be hiding the real you. So here we are kind of both in a kind of never land. But I do want to comment that the word attention comes from two Latin words, which mean tentare means stretch. So attention is to stretch toward. In order to pay attention to someone, you'd have to at least go far enough outside yourself to meet that other person. So if you were caught in kind of narcissistic way of living in which everything revolves around you, it would be hard to pay attention. And of course, attention is the very first one of my 5 A's. The subtitle is The 5 Keys to Mindful Loving. And that's the very first one. And it's the very first need we had in infancy in order for us to survive. Someone had to pay attention to our needs. So I'm thinking of attention as a stretching beyond myself and looking into someone else, but not in a way that's intrusive, in a way that simply responds to whatever's opening up from the other person. It's very much a two-way street. It's not like if I'm paying attention to a sentence in a book, here's the sentence, I have a right to feel anger, so I can just pay attention to that. There's no cost in the sentence in the book, but there is a cost of vulnerability when you're with another human. And God knows it's been hard for us to trust one another when we've been so ill-equipped to open to each other.
What do you mean by being ill-equipped to open to each other?
It has to do with two issues. The first is trust. Can I trust that if I show you who I am, you will treat it with care, that you will respond with what I consider the very definition of love, a caring, committed connection? Will you greet me with a caring, committed connection, or will you greet me with a critical response? And then the second part, that where the word ill-equipped comes in, is we're not very practiced at showing our vulnerability. There's a quote in the book of Zechariah in the Hebrew Bible. Look at how I was wounded in the house of those who loved me. And that statement is an example of what you sound like when you're ready to be seen in all your vulnerability. And you're also letting it be known that even the ones who loved you didn't always come through. So there's a lot going on when it comes to our being together. And of course, we bring a whole history with us in addition to that. I mean, maybe there's been a series of betrayals and disappointments. So to invite someone else into your heart, which has been so often wounded, is scary stuff for most of us. Is this how you see it also?
Yeah, but what's coming up in my mind, interestingly enough, is something that comes up often, which is the question of balance. And even another one of your A's is acceptance. And sometimes when I'm trying to talk about it, I find myself using the word acknowledge rather than accept, because people layer so many meanings in accept, like just take it, even if it's really painful or abusive, or, don't seek change in some way. And in any relationship, in any relatedness, I think the question of balance does come up, where I care about you tremendously, and that needs to be balanced with wisdom. Like, I'm not in control of the universe. I can't snap my fingers and make the pain go away, which would that I could, but I can't. Or the balance between caring for you and caring for myself, which in some dynamics just feels wrong and feels too selfish, too self-centered. But inevitably, I think there's a kind of crash and burn that happens where the impulse to give, for example, may no longer be one of generosity. It's a kind of martyrdom, and it's a strain, and it's too much. And so I'm really fascinated by issues of balance, and in relationships, some kind of flow of something. And it's not like work-life balance. It's a different balance of some recognition of the truth of things, like how things actually work. It's
I agree, that certainly fits. When you were saying about, I can't make it better for you, I can't fix it. I like to say that what I can offer is to be with you as you go through it, rather than make sure you don't have to go through it. And then regarding the acceptance, I agree that it has a lot to do with acknowledgement. And I'm using the word acceptance also to refer to I'm with you just as you are. You don't have to change a hair for me, as the song says. You can just be who you are, and you don't have to look good all the time, and you don't have to never have needs. I accept the fact that you're a person and all persons have needs. So I accept that you not only you have needs, but that you're going to bring some of them to me. And I can't promise that I can fulfill them all, but I certainly won't shame you for having them. So it's acceptance in that wider sense. And that word acceptance is from another Latin word, which means to take. Yeah, to take. Chipere is to take. So I'm taking what you're offering and holding it in a respectful and um, affectionate way. That's the kind of acceptance that happens in a truly spiritually mature relationship.
You know what I'm also thinking of? Well, I'm thinking of two things. One is I've spent a lot of time in more recent years in teaching, working with people we call caregivers, which is a little bit of a funny word sometimes, whether in their personal lives at home or in their professional lives, they're in that role of dealing very directly with someone else's suffering, really being on the front lines of that, um, often having huge caring and love and uh, empathy, and burning out nonetheless, not from lack of empathy. There is some other balance, whether it's having enough loving kindness for themselves or having boundaries, realizing, well, I can't fix it, I can't save you, and I shouldn't have that expectation, because the more I expect of myself that's unreasonable, that's unjust, the more I can't sustain this effort, or I can't sustain this relationship. So that too is an area that I think is powerful to explore. And when I realized that some people were not kind of strictly caregivers in those roles, but they'll say, well, I do that in almost all my relationships. I end up being the giver. It's very, very difficult for me to learn to receive, to accept that, for there to be some kind of flow. So I was wondering if you had any commentary on that.
I do. I see intimacy as the exchange of what I call the 5 A's, the five ingredients of love: attention, acceptance, appreciation, affection, and allowing. Allowing being the opposite of controlling. And what I thought of when you were phrasing your question was, of course, the loving kindness practice that I learned so much about from you, and how it begins with yourself. So I'm in the center, and then there are concentric circles around me. The nearest one those are the near and dear ones, the family and friends. Then the ones who are neutral and so forth. And of the final circle would, of course, include all beings. If I want to make a contribution as a helper or a caregiver, I'm going to have to take care of that central circle first. And I'm going to have to think of my body, mind as the vehicle, the instrument by which a Holy Spirit is helping others. So it's happening through me, and it's up to me to take care of this body, mind, heart, gut, so that I can continue to be of service. So that's one thing. And then the final thing is it's always going to be about how do I help you help yourself, as opposed to how do I keep on helping.
Thank you. And you did a recent reformulation of those concentric circles. Is that
Yes.
right? And where can one find that? I know you sent it by email, but you're not sending it to the whole world by email. So
Sharon's referring to how I added to the um, object of your aspirations. Now that we're more conscious of racial prejudices and so many other prejudices in society, that I want to extend loving kindness to those who are looked upon as different. And actually, you could, take what you're concerned about as not you, Sharon, but anyone. We take what we're concerned about in society, such as human rights or ecology, and we can bring that into the meta practice and just add our own concentric circles that reflect what we've taken an interest in. My belief is that you wouldn't find something really appealing and focus and find yourself focusing on it if it didn't also indicate that you have a calling to respond to it. And that's what metta does. That's what the loving kindness practice does. It brings the focus of the immeasurable qualities of an enlightened life, especially loving kindness, compassion, equanimity, and joy at others' success. That becomes what we want to offer. And we begin by offering it to ourselves.
Well, I love the reformulation that you did. And, as I was taught in Burma in 1985, or even as I understood beforehand, if you're undertaking that as a practice, excuse me, where there's a systematic unfolding of the practice, the underlying principle of that is that it's meant to be done in the easiest way possible. So it's not a practice of struggle or strain. And if it's sometime it's too difficult, we get creative. We use active imagination, which I can talk about in a little while if you like. But the idea is that there's no strict rule like you've got to do it in exactly this way.
Mm-hmm.
To find the easiest way possible is a creative endeavor. So, for example, classically, the practice does begin with the offering of loving kindness to ourselves because we're supposed to be the easiest of all. Well, guess what? That's not always true. And so rather than, struggle in some way, I just encourage people, well, shift the order. It's fine. So we go from what's easiest to a little more challenging and a little more challenging and a little more challenging. But I'll say, honestly, it's all challenging.
Absolutely.
Every category, those whom we admire and have helped us a lot, sometimes we fixate on the one time they weren't there for us, or we feel, what do they care about my good wishes? I'm like nothing compared to them. It's all a challenge in one way or another.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense. You asked where someone could find it. I'm putting it in the book that I've just completed, which is called Help on the Way. I have submitted it as Shambhala, but it's still in the works. It's called Help on the Way, Our Seen and Unseen Allies. This has become a very fascinating topic to me, and I have a whole chapter in the book on how important it is that partners be assisting forces to one another. The assisting forces are the visible and invisible helpers that are everywhere around us. And could we even think of a healthy relationship as one in which you are contributing to one another's practice? Practice of what? Practice of mindfulness and loving kindness, mainly. Are we ready for some questions from the people who are listening in?
Yeah, let's take some questions.
Sharon,
I'm
did
sorry.
you have? Sharon, is
No,
that okay with
we
you?
can start. We can start with the questions, and we'll see
Okay.
what happens next.
So there's quite a few questions in the chat. Um, the first one that I think is a good one to start with is from Angela, and she's asking, could you speak about how power factors in relationships?
Okay, well, thank you for your question, Angela. And that's certainly an important one. If we think of power as the ability and the right to fulfill your goals in life, then power makes sense in relationship. And the only thing we'd be watching out for are power differentials. If power means control, I'm the one in charge, I'm the big shot here, then it's not going to fit at all, because that would not be in keeping with what intimacy is really about. It's about how I have power for instead of power over. And I'm thinking of a quote from Shakespeare. Oh, it is wonderful to have the power of a giant, but it is tyranny to use it as a giant, if you see what I mean. Sharon, did you want to comment on that? On anything from the question?
Yeah, they're trying to fix the beep. I don't know. Let's see what that is. Um, yeah, I think that's also very interesting because it's something that is important to consider in a dynamic, but not in a kind of cold and sort of mechanical way, like who's empowered today, in that sort of dominating sense. But understanding that rather than thinking of it as power, you might think of it as self-respect, something like that. Like, is there a kind of mutuality, or is there a layer of expectation such that one is living someone else's dream, basically, and just trying to make it come true, and thereby losing more and more of yourself and your own sense of agency and so on, or understanding that love and power considerations might lead to actions that may not look conventionally loving. In other words, one of my big talking points about loving kindness is that it doesn't mandate a certain kind of action or behavior. To be loving doesn't mean you have to say yes, or you have to let them move back in, or you have to give them more money, or you have to let them hurt you again. When you take action, even strong and fierce action, with a boundary, with saying no, with a kind of intensity, even, that doesn't mean it has to be coming from a place of hatred or estrangement. And ideally, it wouldn't be. It could be coming from a place of connection and care, but the care is equally toward yourself as the other, or you understand that discernment, wisdom, to the best of your ability, is telling you that's it. That there's some kind of edge there that needs to be honored. And so that is a consideration that doesn't negate the force of the love. And so I think they need to be held a little bit distinctly.
Dave, I muted you because the sound seemed to be coming from your computer. You can just unmute now and we'll see if it's fixed. You just need to press unmute, Dave. Okay, it seems to be from your system somehow, but I don't know why. But we'll just, when you're not talking, we'll mute.
Oh, okay. I just can't figure out where it's coming from because I don't hear it.
Okay.
I'm not hearing it from the computer.
Okay.
But anyway, did we have another question?
Yeah. Karen asked, when I'm unable to get beyond my own fear and spread out to hold where my beloved's health is in danger, I'm not sure how to be, and I'm out of balance in how I place my attention. I guess she's asking for advice in that circumstance.
I didn't quite understand the question. Could you
Sure.
rephrase it or?
Let me try reading it again. When I'm unable to get beyond my own fear and spread out, like get past her own fear, get beyond it, to hold where my beloved's health is in danger, I'm not sure how to be, and I'm out of balance in how I place my attention. Where, in other words, can she place her attention to get beyond her fear when her loved one's health is in danger?
So when the partner's health is in danger, when your partner's health is in danger, you feel a fear for what will happen to him or her. Is that or that?
I'm assuming so. Yes.
And my usual approach is to take a look at these three options: that you admit your fear and that you share it with someone that you trust, talk about it, that you let yourself then feel it, in other words, allow it. So first I am admitting that I'm afraid, then I'm allowing myself to feel the fear rather than trying to eliminate it. It's a paradoxical approach because, of course, we do want to eliminate fear, but when you actually let yourself feel it, it has a way of shifting, and then you're more likely to act as if the fear could not stop you or drive you. It can't stop you from doing something, and it can't make you do something.
Okay. So Sharon, let's take a question for you now. Um, and then there's one question here specifically for you. It says, Sharon, have you suggestions for kind, creative care for approaching care during caregiver burnout, compassionate communication breakdown, how to restore it?
I think actually I would tie my response to both these questions together in a way that when I give meditation instruction, probably the most common instruction I say is something like, when your mind wanders, don't freak out, you know? The most important thing is the return. It's like renewal or replenishment. It's a practice of recovery. Because one of the ways we get disappointed is by very unrealistic expectations. Like people say to me all the time, some variation of, how do I stay mindful all day long at work? Or how do I, keep the level of concentration I got on retreat? And I always say, it's not going to happen. You're going to fall down, it's going to break, you're going to get exhausted, but you can bounce back. You can come back more quickly, with more grace, with better humor. So that would be actually the first thing I would say, is that we all fall down. We either have to get up or let others help us up, and we go on. And learning that is such a huge learning. And then, in the particular case of like that kind of burnout, what I found working with the most extraordinary people doing really hard work, often unheralded and unsupported, is that first of all, it has to be okay that there is some kind of loving attention to yourself. And it's often not okay. And so whether that's through community support, like-minded friends, or just knowing it's actually okay. Like one of the first programs I did in that space was through the Garrison Institute for Domestic Violence Shelter Workers, frontline workers in the shelters. And then the directors and supervisors of some of the shelters said they wanted a program. So we established a parallel program, and they came up with a phrase themselves. What they said was they wanted to help establish a culture of wellness at work. And of course, your situation may be at home, but whatever, it's the same kind of thing. And so they all had different suggestions of, have a rooftop garden or have a meditation space or something like that. And this one woman said, And remember, a culture might mean your body and mind, your team, your lab, your whole office, your family, whatever. So this one woman said that in order to help establish a culture of wellness at work, I realized I have to start taking a lunch break. And everyone in the room who did not work at a shelter was completely aghast. We said, "You don't take a lunch break? Like, isn't it in your contract?" And she said, "Oh, it's in my contract, but there's so much to do and it's endless. And, it's so burdensome. There's always a crisis." And she said, "But now I realize I cannot go on unless I start taking a break." And because we were meeting with people in between retreats, we got to hear about her progress. So the first time she came in, she said, "It didn't work." She said, "I closed the door and someone crouched down and looked through the keyhole and they saw I was in there. So I didn't get a break." And maybe 3 weeks later, she came back and she said, "It worked." She said, "I closed the door and turned off the lights and I got a break." And I realized that was likely the hardest part of that whole thing, was realizing she needed it and she was going to go for it. So whatever that looks like for you, I would really encourage you to consider that.
Yeah, we haven't been trained from the beginning to take care of ourselves. It's always been think of others first, and that certainly does make sense. But it's love your neighbor as yourself. So it's supposed to be equal. Anyways, we have another question.
Yes. Next question is, how do you balance developing a deep inner spiritual strength and self-reliance and being vulnerable or sharing emotional intimacy with someone?
You want to be self-reliant while at the same time you are wanting to turn to someone else to meet certain needs. Would that be the way you understood it, Ivan?
Yeah, it's like, how do you develop your inner spiritual qualities and self-reliance while at the same time remaining vulnerable and emotionally intimate with somebody?
Well, thanks for the question. And one of the points I try to make in the book is that a relationship works best when both people engage in a spiritual practice, especially that of loving kindness. And when you think of working together to help each other in your practice, that question just kind of folds into a new focus, which is how are we together in a spiritual way, rather than how can I maintain my spirituality and you maintain yours. And I do get it that the two or more people could come from different traditions. But loving kindness and mindfulness seem to fit into any religious or spiritual orientation. Also, as far as the self-reliance is concerned, an infant can't be self-reliant. The infant needs 100% need fulfillment from his, her, their caregivers. But in the adult world, we're never asking for 100% from someone. We're asking for a moderate dose of need fulfillment. And so part of that is self-reliance as one of the ways to make sure you don't ask too much of someone else. So that's how I see self-reliance as actually contributing to healthy intimacy. Otherwise, you'd be, trying to get everything you need from one other person. That's not going to be sustainable.
Well, I just think of vulnerability as honesty, as truthfulness. rather than needing something, like fix me kind of energy toward the other person. And it may not be in every connection we have, every relationship we have, we want that degree of vulnerability, but certainly in many, we would have a very different sense of our lives if there was that sense of real truthfulness. I think of even what is kind of a cliched almost recommendation from communications counselors, like use I language rather than you language. And I've seen it, as cliched as it can be, do some interesting things. Like instead of accusing somebody, like you're never here for me, you go through the process of more truthfully saying, I was hoping for ABC from you, and it didn't come. And so I felt, and that's real vulnerability. You have to be willing to be that open and honest.
Mm-hmm.
That's true communication.
Yeah. Yeah, just the willingness to let the other person know what your needs are. That in itself shows vulnerability because I'm showing that I don't have it. I'm asking it of you. Ivan, I'm willing to stay an extra 10 minutes. Sharon, would that be okay with you? Because we had a break.
Well, we still have 10 more minutes to go in
Okay, no, I
before
mean,
half
if
past.
because you're going to cut out the part where we,
Well,
oh, no, I guess you're going to just keep it as is.
yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
all
Do,
right.
do you want to move to the next question?
Yes.
Okay, great. The next question is, I'm having questions around my deep need for acknowledgement, being seen and heard, and also knowing that my path is really interior in many ways and not a path of outer acknowledgement. This paradox keeps coming up. Do you have any advice around this?
Yes, and thank you for the question. When that happens to me, when I notice that I want more and more, and I'm never totally satisfied, when the need that I'm holding within any relationship has not only a craving for more and more, but also I'm recognizing that I don't even have a capacity for satisfaction. I feel I'm insatiable. I first ask myself if I should trace it back to childhood, because what we were deprived of in early life, from a psychological point of view, we might find ourselves craving in adult life in a way that can't really, as I said, can't really be satisfied. It's the essence of dukkha, which is the word that refers in Buddhism to the universality of suffering as part of the human condition. But the word suffering really means dissatisfaction. Like I can never be fully satisfied for very long. It's part of the other important teaching of impermanence. So that's where I would first look. If you notice that what you're seeking so much of in an adult relationship is what you didn't get from one of your parents, then the work is not to blame your parents for how they deprived you or how life was so deficient with them or even abusive. You go instead to grieving the fact that it was missing, the very thing that all of us mammals do when we encounter loss or lack. We go to the place of, let me mourn for this. And when I grieve and ultimately let go of having to find it in the same way that I craved in childhood, that's the essence of the adult transition Milarepa, a Tibetan Buddhist teacher, says, leaving home is half the Dharma. In other words, you've done half of your spiritual practice just when you finally have broken with how much of the past you're holding on to in yourself and projecting onto others. So that's how I would start to work with it. It's the kind of thing one would work on in therapy, I guess.
Sharon, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say in an immediate sense, there's a certain way in which I think we learn to relate to our thoughts right here and now with a little more spaciousness rather than taking them so to heart and having them dominate and define us. It may be the same thought, but with the wisdom, like what Dave was just talking about, or the wisdom of the irrationality of certain desires, because there could never be enough praise in this world. And it's inevitable that not every single person will praise you. Shambhala published my first book, Loving Kindness. I'm really, really happy to say, and launched my entire career as a writer. And it was a very long time before I could write that book. In fact, I kept running into Sam Ivanstad, and he'd say, "What happened to that book?" It was a very long time. And if you ever see the original hardcover, you'll see that one of my friends in the blurb on the back said, "We've been waiting a long time for this book." And another person said, "And it's long awaited first book," so it was like a huge thing for me that it actually was published, that it came out. And soon after it was published, I was in California and I had lunch with somebody. And she said, "Sharon, you wrote that book in such a way, it's just like sitting down and having a conversation with you. It's just like being with you." And I was so excited. I was so jazzed that I brought up that comment at dinner that night with a whole other group of people. And someone at dinner said, "Well, that's not true." She said, "I'm reading the book. It doesn't sound anything like you. It's nothing like being with you." And I thought, okay, you can be ecstatic at lunch and depressed at dinner. You can remember it was the same book. One person took it one way, another person took it another way. So the hunger may be there. It seems like a natural human trait. I want everyone to love me and say it's like the best book they've ever read, but life's not like that. So in the face of those thoughts, rather, you don't have to condemn them or, put yourself down, but we hold them with a lot more space. It's like, ain't gonna happen, and so it's a very different relationship right in that moment to the very same thoughts.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. And it was the first question that came up, but I'll save it for now. And Dave, it's for you. It says, how did you pick the title for the book, How to Be Adult in Relationships?
The first book that I ever wrote, thank you for your question. The first book I ever wrote was called How to Be an Adult. And then when I started working on the book on relationships, I thought to myself, well, what I'm actually doing is expanding my original idea and applying it to relationships. So that's where I came up with the idea of how to be an adult in relationships. And some people are turned off by the title because it sounds insulting, like, oh, I'm already an adult, so why would I want this book? But I mean how to act in an adult way rather than in a way that still ties us either to magical thinking, childish thinking, projections, transferences. And by the way, I see a lot of transference, which is carrying over issues from your childhood into your adult relationships. And that became my other book, which title says it all. When the past is present. So you always want to ask yourself, I saw this movie once, and one of the characters said, there are always four people in the house of a relationship: your parents, my parents. And they're influencing how we act toward each other. So that's an important thing to look into if you're coming into full adulthood. Combining self-reliance with the capacity for intimacy, mutual reliance, mutual alliance. I guess that's the only kind of alliance there can be. Sharon, did you want to add anything?
No, I think that was very interesting and a wonderful response.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. There's a lot of effusive and thankful comments in the chat, both for the work that you've done in the past and what you're saying this evening. I'll send emails to both of you to share those. But I just want to thank you all, or you both, on behalf of everyone who's listening, for sharing your wisdom with us. And thank you to the thousands of people who signed up for this call and those of you who put aside the time to join us this evening live. If you're interested in digging deeper into this material, feel free to follow the link at the bottom of the page to learn more about the upcoming interactive online course with Dave, or look for the forthcoming emails about it. Also, please keep an eye out for Sharon's new book, Real Life, available for pre-order now. And I know she's been recording the audiobook version this week, and it's always so fun when an author does the reading of their own book. So I'm looking forward to listening to that, Sharon. And I guess just if either of you have any closing remarks, that would be wonderful, and we can call it a night.
Well, I just want to say thank you to you, Ivan, and to you, Sharon, and to everyone who is listening in. It's always a joy to share at this level.
I'll echo that. And the more conversations about love that we have, the better we are.